After Army Chief General Bipin Rawat said that terror camp in Pakistan's Balakot that was bombed by Indian jets in February this year has been reactivated very recently. More details are now emerging of how grave is this threat. Sources say that 450 to 500 terrorists are presently at terror launch pads, and that the nature of threat presently is far more serious than ahead of the festive season during other years. So more details emerging. Vishnu Shom now joins me for more on this. Vishnu, what information are you getting? How grave is this threat?
Well, what we can say, and we don't exaggerate this at all, but the sense among security planners is that presently India on the Western Front faces a very significant threat of terrorism and terror attacks, far more serious in a sense than what is the threat perception ahead of the festive season, when typically it tends to be high. It's very different. It's qualitatively different, the nature of the intelligence which they have available to them. And to give you an example of that, between 450 to 500 terrorists are at terrorist launch pads presently. That's double that of the last 3 years. What are terrorist launch pads? Terror launch pads are those areas, forward deployed positions just on in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, on the other side of the line of control. And the information, and you mentioned about Balakot, and the Army Chief actually saying that the Balakot Jaish-e-Mohammed terror camp, which was bombed by the Indian Air Force on the 26th of February, is active once again. A few more details on that. One piece of information is that the detail on the revival of the Balakot camp came about 4 days ago. So it's very new evidence or intelligence which has now emerged. There are 60 terrorists who have apparently entered Jammu and Kashmir or other parts of India across the line of control and the international border. So it's important to note that when we talk about this threat perception at this stage, we are talking about Gujarat, we're talking about Rajasthan, Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir as well. There are 4 to 5 specific terror launch pads, the location of which has not been disclosed to us at this stage, which appear to be poised for infiltration within a finite period of time. They are basing this on the numbers which are present over there. And the point being mentioned repeatedly to us by very high-level security planners, observers, call them what you may, our sources, is that usually what happens is that a large number of terrorists often do come to these terror launch pads, but then they return, they don't do anything. However, there is a substantive build-up at this time of the year and on this particular year, which makes this different. Our sources telling us our response will be at any level, any range and anywhere. And adequate plans have been prepared. And this fits into what the Army Chief also said earlier today when he said that India does in fact have plans as far as Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is concerned. And he said this in the past, where he says that it all depends on the orders given by the government. But the sense which I get is that India is preparing, the security establishment is preparing for a major security threat and possibly major terrorist attacks ahead of the festive season, for which there are a variety of plans which have been made in terms of retaliation. Adequate force levels are everywhere. Troops are not being pushed in per se. Now, the period we're talking about is also important because while it's September, it's still extremely hot. Remember that by the end of November, many of the passes which terrorists attempt to use to try and infiltrate into India start getting shut down because of snow. And so typically Gurez and Kargil get shut down first because it snows there earlier. Then as you move down the line of control to places like Machil, Keran, Tangdar and Uri, they progressively shut down as well. And when they open up, when the snows melt, then it's that reverse order that takes place in terms of opening up. So between now and let's say the middle of November, towards the end of November, that we see these terror launch pads, these areas of entry, of ingress shutting down. So there is that period of time within which there is a real concern that more terrorists could be looking to come in.
Vishnu, as far as our response to this terror threat is concerned, what's on the table?
Well, I'll just repeat what I've been told, and my sources telling me our response will be at any level, any range and anywhere. They're obviously not going to spell out where they're going to respond, how they're going to respond. And the way it works is that there would be several plans already in place. And it depends on the government to pick a plan and then for the armed forces to implement them. And by armed forces, I'm not speaking only of the army, I'm speaking about the Air Force and the army, which work in conjunction with each other. So in as much as the government indicates at this stage that Pakistan-occupied Kashmir could well be within its radar, it doesn't necessarily have to be Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, it could be other areas as well. It all really depends on the plan that, and by Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, we're talking about areas like Baltistan or the Gilgit-Skardu area. It may not necessarily be those areas. It could be another area in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir which could be targeted. The point being over here is that there is a sense that this is a government that by its nature is unpredictable. There is no necessary one step that they would follow. They have many options and they wouldn't have decided on what the options are other than what our sources are telling us now, that these options or some of these options will be relied on very heavily if there is a terror attack. India will counter this in a very forceful manner.
All right, Vishnu, thanks very much for joining us with all those details. Joining me on the phone line is General Ata Hasnain, former GOC of the 15th Corps. General Hasnain, the information that Vishnu is reporting is that 450 to 500 terrorists are at terror launch pads presently. That's double than that of the last 3 years. What do you make of this threat?
Obviously, see, what Vishnu has just given you is an assessment, which is a build-up from 5th of August when the momentous decisions on Article 370 and 35A were taken. And these are obviously shaken up Pakistan completely. And as we are all aware, this year has been a year of reasonable normalcy after the Pulwama incident and the Balakot attacks. That's primarily because the government of India and all its security forces have been targeting the complete ecosystem in Kashmir, which has prevented Pakistan from being able to carry out a resurgence of terror in Kashmir. Now, given that, Pakistan is obviously looking at a fresh strategy, once again reactivating the line of control, trying to get in the maximum terrorists inside, because the strength of terrorists at the moment is absolutely low, which does not allow Pakistan to make its presence felt inside the valley. They are very low in terms of also the number of terrorist leaders, so there is an attempt at the moment to try and push in maximum leaders too. So I'm told that almost nightly there are efforts going on by Pakistan to carry out infiltration almost along the entire line of control, particularly in the Kashmir sector. So given all this, I'm sure the government of India, the Indian Army and the Air Force are looking at their own doctrines, their own strategy in a very, very fresh and an innovative way, because we just can't be sitting on our haunches and accepting this kind of a thing. I'm sure that if there's going to be a major terror attack in terms of an IED or something like that in the valley, we would have already got all our contingencies in place and something more proactive, even more proactive than what happened in Balakot and the surgical strikes will probably take place.
General Hasnain, you've been the General Officer Commanding of the 15th Corps. When such a terror threat arises, what are the options on the table?
You see, the first most important thing for us to do is obviously to ensure that our intelligence is well placed. I can see already from General Rawat's statements that our intelligence sources are in good stead at the moment. We are getting the right kind of information. The whole processing is taking place. A lot of dependence takes place on intelligence. Given that, and now that the information is available, that there are this many number of terrorists on the launch pads, it's important to identify those launch pads, exactly get the right coordinates and everything in terms of targeting, etc. And we have not had a proactive strategy of striking before an incident takes place. So far, the Indian doctrine has always been incident-based, IE-based, and based on that, a response. Unless something very drastically changes, and we go proactive and even strike before a terrorist incident takes place in the valley. But given by the normal flow of events, we will await something happening, but keep all the powder dry, keep the intelligence available with us, and look forward to a very, very early response anywhere with total surprise being achieved.
All right, General Hasnain, thanks very much for joining us with your perspective.